Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the first talk of the Global Taiwan Studies program here at the Asian Institute of the Monk School of the Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. This is our first talk of 2022, and my name is Sida Liu. I'm the acting director of the Global Taiwan Studies program this year. And today our topic is a very important one. It's on the politics of climate change in Taiwan. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to do our traditional land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this island. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Zhongen Liu, from National Taiwan University. Professor Liu is Associate Professor of Sociology at National Taiwan University and also a faculty affiliate in the International Program on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. And he received his PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And before he returned to Taiwan to teach, he was assistant professor at Occidental College in Los Angeles. And also before that was a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. So today, Professor Liu will present his research with the title, Understanding Politics of Climate Change in Taiwan, International Isolation, Green Developmentalism, and Energy Democracy. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Professor Liu for the talk.
Thank you so much, Sida, for the introduction. I just want to make sure my voice is, you can hear me? Good. All right. So let me share my screen. Can you see my slide, Sudha?
Not yet.
Not yet. Just a second.
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay. So greetings, everyone. It is really my pleasure and honor to participate in this talk, and especially thanks for Sida for the introduction. He has been a friend and a mentor for a long time, and it's really my pleasure to be here virtually. And I just also want to greet everyone that good evening if you're in Toronto, good morning if you're in Taiwan. It's 8:30 over here. I know it's in the evening over there. And today my topic will be about the politics of climate change in Taiwan. And I aim to present this as a very general talk, right? And I hope within the next 45 minutes to an hour, I will give you a very general overview of the situation of the climate actions in Taiwan and a few analytic kind of few different ways we can look into this. I want to make I will use some content from my current research, but overall, this is one of kind of derived from a review paper that I'm drafting. And I also want to highlight there will be some contents in Chinese language in my presentation. And if you don't worry, I will if I show up these content, I will make sure I explain everything. So you don't need to worry about the language issues. Okay. Right, so I am an environmental sociologist. I have been researching for climate change policy in the last 10 years. And since I come back to Taiwan about 3 years ago, I start to pay more attention and start to work on the issues here in Taiwan. And today, I think Taiwan is a really interesting case in terms of fighting for climate change for a variety of reasons I will be talking about. And I want to introduce this really interesting case to you. And I hope we can continue this conversation even after today's talk. Okay, so very quickly about the outline of my talk. First of all, I understand that everyone might not be a climate change experts here. So I will very quickly go through Taiwan's carbon emission emission profiles, the impact we're going to receive, and very quickly go through the recent policy developments in Taiwan. Then I will structure my talk in 3 different levels. So on the kind of the highest level, the global level, I will talk about how Taiwan's unique international status shape its climate actions. And as you know, Taiwan is not an UN member, and therefore Taiwan cannot participate in all of the United Nations negotiation on climate change. I will talk about how the implication of that isolation. Second, I will go into the national. So as many of you are aware, Taiwan has traditionally been a kind of a textbook case of developmental state. And I will talk about how that developmentalism legacy steers its current energy choices. Finally, I will zoom in on the more local level. I will talk about some initiatives from Taiwan civil societies and some recent challenges at the very bottom-up level. And finally, I'll quickly conclude. So that's the outline of my talk. And since today's a climate change talk, I feel like it's almost I need to do an obligatory slide on the trend, on the warming trend that we have seen. So this is a warming trend specifically for Taiwan. So according to this Berkeley Earth database, Taiwan has already seen a 2-degree warming in 2020 compared to the historical baseline. And we're heading for really serious warming if we're not doing enough by the middle of this century and the end of this century. So Taiwan, first of all, is experiencing climate change, and as I will illustrate, will be hit quite hard since it's an island country with very fragile geography and landscape, etc. And so, since this is an important topic for Taiwan and also for I mean, obviously, we're all in all of these together. And after seeing the trend, I want to use some examples to illustrate the impacts and consequences and how things are changing due to climate change. So this is my favorite slide to illustrate the impact we have seen. This is, for those of you who have been to Taiwan, you might not believe that this used to be the case in high mountains in Taiwan. There was a ski resort. I mean, I didn't know about this until this year. I think it was in the 60s and 70s. There was a government kind of run ski resort on top of Hehuan Mountain, if you are familiar with Taiwan. And in these days, there's obviously not enough snow to keep a ski resort running. And all the facilities become ruins that you will see alongside on the hiking trail, right? This is near Hehuan Dongfeng if you are interested in hiking, right? So warming is here, and it's visible that we can tell from this historical pictures. But some people might question that Taiwanese people, it's a tropical island. We do not ski, so this might not matter to us that much. But for those of you who are interested in know a little bit about Taiwan, you know the obsession of food here. So this is another example I really love on how climate change can change the routine that we know very drastically, right? So these are lychee and longan, and they're grown domestically here. And I think about a couple years ago, because of warm winter, these fruits need cold winter to flower. But since I think 1 year the winter was too warm, there was just absolutely no flowers. So the yield decreased by 80 to 90%. So obviously a huge hit for domestic farmers and also for consumers. And this is just one kind of small example to show how climate change can impact different aspects of our lives. So besides skiing and fruits, I also want to illustrate, for example, these are some public health impacts. right? And on the left, you can see the dengue fever area, and used to be only constrained in southern Taiwan since it's warmer. But in the warming scenario, we are likely to see dengue fever going up north to the whole country in the later part of this century. And obviously this will have huge public health consequences. And finally, Taiwan is an island very much prone to natural disasters. And this is a photo of the recent drought we've seen last year in the middle of 2021. And so the BBC News actually report on this and why the world should pay attention to Taiwan's drought. And because Taiwan, as I will illustrate, is in it's a key hub for manufacturing, especially for electronic products. And without water, the supply chain can be interrupted. And so besides droughts, we have also seen an increase of high intensity rainfalls. So last year, actually the weather station on my campus at National Taiwan University break the historical record that we have 209 millimeters of rain in 1 hour. And so we have increasingly seen more and more often these extreme weather events and typhoons, droughts, and heavy rainfall, and etc. And all of these will impact Taiwan immensely, especially the more vulnerable area in the coastal region and the indigenous towns and the mountains. Right. So these are some of the impacts and consequences of climate change to Taiwan. And finally, and now I want to shift gear to Taiwan's emission profile. So before I delve into kind of the politics of climate change, it is very important to have a general view of where the emission comes from in Taiwan as of now. Right. So I listed four characteristics of Taiwan's emissions. First, the industrial sector make the dominant contributions. The industrial manufacturing sector contribute about more than half of the country's emission. This is very substantial and tells much about the economic base in Taiwan. It's very industry and especially manufacturing industry heavy economy. Second, in climate change policy, we divided the sectors into different sectors. Some sectors are easier to decarbonize, but some are harder. But in Taiwan's case, many emission sources come from the so-called harder to abate sectors that include steel, petrochemicals, and cement, right? And this adds extra difficulties for Taiwan to reduce its carbon emissions. Third, Taiwan is an export-oriented economy. Many of the emission actually goes into goods that ship abroad, right? So the export dynamic very much determines the growth of Taiwan's emissions and very much linked with our international trade. And finally, in Taiwan, we have seen a case of what me and my colleague called carbon oligopoly. Right? So, or in environmental sociology, we call this disproportionality, that the emissions are dominated by a few large players. So in this case, the largest 10 companies, which I will introduce, accounts for about 40% of emissions in Taiwan. So they are very substantial. So these are the kind of general characteristics. And these are the long-term trends, right? So in the 90s, Taiwan emits about just a little bit over 100 million tons of carbon. But last year it's about 275, right? And so the trend grew from the 90s to about 2007. And since 2007, the trend has been pretty much flat, has been staying around 2050, 2070s for a long time. But the goal is how do we bring this trend down and to keep going down in the coming decades. In this table, it's also important to identify where the emission comes from, right? So the carbon emissions in Taiwan mostly come from the energy sector. And as you see, the bottom orange part, and also the industrial sector, these are the fuel directly used by the industry. And for the rest, transport, agriculture, service, and residential is much smaller compared to the previous two. And this table also shows similar information, right? So in climate change science, we divide the emission into two different types. There's direct emissions and indirect emissions. Direct emission means, let me go through this very quickly. The energy comes from, in Taiwan, there is one single national grid company, the Taidian. So Taipower is responsible of generating energy for all users in Taiwan. So the emission will count towards, if we only see direct emissions, every emission in the energy sector will mostly go to Taipower. But that's not a very accurate way to attribute responsibilities, because most of the electricity that are used by the industries, right? So therefore, on the left, we have the direct and indirect emissions, which shows that about half of the middle, the green and yellowish, the color shows the industrial emission counts about half if we kind of attribute the energy use, the electricity use to them, right? So, okay, so among these industries, among these really key players in Taiwan, I'll further break them into different groups, right? So this is a share, the whole pie is roughly Taiwan's emissions. And here I divided them into different sectors. So first we have the refinery and petrochemicals accounts for about 19%. 3% goes into cement, 13% goes to steel, and 12% goes into the electric industry that you often see on news, including the Taiji and the TSMC. They account for about 3% of Taiwan's emissions. But as I said, the top 10 emitters really contribute significantly. So coming from the top, we have the Formosa Petrochemical Corporation, that is Taiso, and Nanya Plastic, Formosa Plastic, and Formosa Chemicals. All the four companies actually belongs to the same corporation. So the Taiso Corporation, Taiso Group alone counts for about 18% of Taiwan's emission. That's the #1 contributor to Taiwan's carbon emissions. And the steel company, the China Steel, Zhonggang, and Dragon Steel, Zhonglong Gangtie, they all also belong to the same mother corporation. They themselves accounts for about 12–13%. Right, so if you add the two major corporations together, that's about almost 30% of Taiwan's emission. And this is what I call carbon oligopoly. So Taiwan's emission is really dominated by some of the largest industrial players, and very much not in the electronic industry. Electronic industry are mostly use electricity alone. But these, for steel, cement, and petrochemicals, there is a lot of carbon emissions associated with their production process. So to sum up again, so Taiwan export-oriented, emission coming mostly from industries and dominated by large players. So in the next slide, this is Taiwan's electricity generation curve from yesterday, right? So this tells you where the energy comes from, right? So the last slide, we talked about the energy from the the demand side, and this is from the supply side. And the supply side are critical information for us to think about decarbonization pathways. So this is the figure from yesterday. So you can see that Taiwan still have about less than 10% energy comes from nuclear, which we are on track to phase out by 2025. And in the middle, green and orange, these are the fossil fuels. The orange are coal-fired power plants, and the green area, the darker green, are mostly natural gas. And these are the fossil fuel generation that contribute to climate change. And on the top, you can see Taiwan has been increased their renewable energy generations, especially for the lighter green, that is the solar energy. And 5 years ago, that was negligible, but now it already contributes quite substantially, especially during the day. For the highest peak, it can go up to 10 to 20% at the highest peak. But overall, renewable is still a minor part in our electricity, in our energy mix, accounting for only about 6%. And so the important task at hand is how can we increase the renewables, including solar and wind, and to a lesser extent geothermal, etc., very rapidly in the coming decades. Right, so this is about the emission profile and where energy comes from. I will then go through some quick recent policy developments. Right. So for the biggest news in this area is that Taiwan pledged to go net zero by 2050 in the middle of last year. And this is joining many different countries' pledge that we want to meet net zero carbon emission by the middle of centuries. And so as for now, the government has made the pledge and is actively searching for pathways. And we need to set up the different checkpoints to make sure we can find a way to reach that goal in the coming 30 years. So this has been very substantial. And the entire Taiwan's government has been mobilized since middle of last year, try to reach this goal, and we call this 近零转型 here. And another key point here is that we just have referendums last month in the early December. There were 4 referendums, and 2 of them are energy related. And one of them is about to restart the nuclear 4, 核四, and the other is about protecting the algae reef. Basically, it's a voting on the proposal for new natural gas terminals near Taoyuan. And both of these referendums were defeated, and they were proposed by the Pan Blue camp. And so, therefore, I think it further solidifies the agenda that for the current administration of the Minjindang, for DPP, to go nuclear free by 2025. And second one is to increase the short-term use of natural gas. And the plan is we want to switch from coal. Taiwan was one of the largest coal users around the world, and we want to reduce the use of coal by using natural gas as a bridging fuel before the renewable energy really takes off even higher. Right? So these are some important current policy developments. And the next one, which I also personally participate in, is Taiwan currently has a Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act. We call them 温管法 here. The act has been in place since 2015. but it has not produced much results, and with many different reasons. So there is an ongoing revision of the current act happening as of now. There are many discussions happening, and hopefully a new act will be established, will be launched sometime this year. And critically, I think people expect the new law will put a price on carbon this time, right? And that also says that Taiwan, although you see the pledge, you see laws, you see some current developments, but Taiwan is lagging behind in terms of climate actions in many different aspects. And just for example, Taiwan has been talking about putting a price on carbon, either through a cap and trade or a carbon tax for more than 20 years. But as of now, there's no price on carbon. And as I will talk, oil price and electricity price are extremely cheap here, right? So lagging behind in many aspects, and we need to catch up. Okay, so just a few more slides to illustrate this point. And these are the communication you will very often see in Taiwan social media. President Tsai announced that Taiwan is going 2050 net zero. We are in the phase of doing a net zero transition to meet, to follow the step of other countries. And we say there was even kind of light exhibitions on 2050 net zero on the presidential hall during the COP26 last year. Just kind of illustrate this topic. Finally, it's getting some attention in Taiwan. If you can put net zero emission on the presidential hall, I guess it's finally means it's on the agenda. And I have a slide here to show this was the Greenhouse Gas Management Reduction and Management Act's the plan to reduce. Before we make the pledge, Taiwan was on track to was planning on reducing only 50% of carbon emission by 2050. But now with a new net zero pledge, basically we want to, as you see on the 50% reduction, we want to make that almost 100%. And you can see it's a very steep line. And I'm not going to pretend it's going to be a serious challenge for everyone in Taiwan, for the government, for the companies. And there's a lot of things that needs to be changed if we are serious about this. And to achieve this goal, to increase the 50% to 100%, I also make a reference to another research done by some scholar from last year. You only need to see the figures on the bottom left. And this is, according to some global assessments, for Taiwan to meet kind of 1.3 Celsius warming scenario, the most critical thing for Taiwan is to increase the yellow and purple technology, that is solar and wind, and at the same time decrease the use of coal and gas in the coming decades. And so this is the challenge Taiwan is facing. And I want to add that doing this in Taiwan, I think is particularly difficult due to, number one, Taiwan's geography. Taiwan has very limited land size. For any development on solar and wind, you need land. And in the later half of my talk, I will talk about how the land use with renewables already become a controversial issues in many parts of Taiwan. And just so you know, Taiwan's land size is about, I checked on yesterday, it's about 1/30 of the province of Ontario. For the Canadians audience here, so Taiwan is a very small land size, very densely populated with 23.5 million people, and that's more people than the province of Ontario. Okay, so enough about the climate change backgrounds and emission profiles. I'm now moving into the more political dimensions. So as I say, I will structure in 3 different levels: the global, the national, and the local. And first of all, I want to introduce how Taiwan's unique international status shaped its climate actions. And I listed a few key points here. Number 1, Taiwan's climate actions has always been linked to the struggle for international spaces. And there are various downsides for such international exclusion that we have seen. And finally, there are, besides that Taiwan has been limited in terms of formal political participation on the global climate governance, there has been significant new pressures coming from on corporates, on business climate actions through the supply chains. So first, I will go into the international spaces. So for example, I put a picture here. This is an event Taiwanese government hosted during the climate summit just passed last November in COP26 in Glasgow. So Taiwan is not a member of the United Nations. So Taiwan cannot formally participate in the climate summit. And therefore, every year, Taiwan has sent delegations to the climate summit, but only as NGOs that can participate in the side events, not in the negotiation itself. So Taiwan, during this time, Taiwan will host a kind of event to showcase Taiwan's recent climate actions and also making connections, bilateral connections with allies, etc. But because of this international exclusion, I think there's a few consequences. Number 1, Taiwan, since in the UN regime, every country has to propose their national determined contribution to tell in the Paris Agreement framework, countries have to propose their own mitigation goals, and there's a mechanism for the international community to review. But for Taiwan, our strategy is we see ourselves as a regular country, so we follow international all the requirements voluntarily, but because of the lack of international kind of external pressures, many of these volunteer policy has been quite, in my view, quite substantial and very often a gesture policy. Some scholars call this a gesture policy, try to do some kind of window dressing steps, make sure Taiwan, so that people see, oh, Taiwan is also doing something, but it's really lacking substantial change. And because of the Taiwan also face a dilemma that many of the action is really focusing on, can Taiwan be part of the climate governance regime? So there's a lot of effort try to bring Taiwan to the United Nations, including these are combating climate change, Taiwan can help. This is the same slogan that Taiwan used during the COVID to show that Taiwan should be included in the international governance regime. So every year during climate summit, you will see advertisements such as this. This photo comes from the climate summit at Poland. So instead of focusing on real tangible climate actions, because of the lack of international space, Taiwan has to divert a significant proportion of our attention to playing this game, to try to expand our space internationally through climate change. And very often they are not successful. So far, Taiwan has not been granted observer status in the UNFCCC, that is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, although the convention does not require statehood to participate. And sometimes even, this is the news from 2017, so during that year, the deputy EPA administrators was barred from participating, even entering the venue due to China's protest, right? And so these are the news you often see during climate summit. While other countries very often talk about the substantial policy they want to propose, they commit to, Taiwan has to me, quite unfortunately, has to focus on the name games. Can Taiwan participate under what names? And can we bring diplomatic breakthrough in this area? And the international exclusion, I want to emphasize a little more on the downsides of international exclusion. Right, so Taiwan is not only not part of the UN framework, Taiwan is also not part of the OECD, not part of the International Energy Agency, IEA, not part of the World Bank. And all of these international organizations have many initiatives, many governance regarding energy. So Taiwan has to gather these information through our allies or through other means. And from my end, I really see there's a lack of information and knowledge, critical information and knowledge in this regard. And very often there's a delay on the current policy development or information, especially between government and government. And even more, in addition to the lack of knowledge and information, I also see a lack of expertise because of this exclusion. For example, Taiwan is currently thinking about doing carbon pricing, either through cap and trade system or through a carbon tax. And on this matter, this is a very internationally connected policy circle and has been going through different mechanisms under the UN framework. But since Taiwan is not part of any of these, Taiwan does not have any experiences or does not have any expertise doing these policies. And from my end, I see there's some kind of negative consequences, how this constrains Taiwan's climate action, that we are all often playing the catch-up games and seeing other people, other countries' policy development and try to adapt and mimic, not proactively leading the way. And besides the international exclusion, I mentioned that the corporate climate action has been the highlight in Taiwan. That really have changed the discourse in Taiwan. And first of all, one significant news for Taiwan industry is that Apple declared they're going carbon neutral by 2030. But Apple as a company does not produce much of its products. Most of the products are assembly by Taiwanese firms, either operates in Taiwan or in China. And so Apple start to put the pressure onto Taiwanese companies, and it's for the first time in the last 10, 20 years, I start to observe Taiwan's industry start to treat carbon regulation seriously. And the other news is that the EU, the European Union, is planning on doing a carbon tariff or the carbon border adjustment mechanism by 2023. And as an export-oriented economy, Taiwan, any tariff will matter a lot to Taiwan. Therefore, in the past year, we have seen major business, these are all kind of business magazines that you can grab on in 7-Eleven. Many of their cover stories are about these carbon tariff or zero carbon economy from Apple's supply chain pressure. And in many ways, I feel like the international pressure finally come to Taiwan, not through the state-to-state channel, but through the supply chain, through tariffs and supply chain management. And so as for now, Taiwanese businesses are scrambling to meet the net zero pledge and try to make their production more low carbon. And substantially, you have seen the TSMC, Taijidian have committed to one of the largest green energy purchase in the world. And also they started kind of a net zero emission coalitions that consist of major financial players, and as well as cement and China Steel, Zhonggang, substantial players in this area. Right, so the industry is finally moving, and not so much due to national regulations, but in this case through the pressure of global supply chain. And to me, that's actually a quite interesting observation, quite different from experience in other countries. So that is the global dimension. So international exclusion, and there are many downsides, and recent progress on corporate environmental initiatives. Okay, so I'm shifting gear to my second part on the national. So as you know, Taiwan is a developmental state, and that the state has always been heavily involved in managing our economy. And the same thing holds true when Taiwan think about how we choose our energy choices and to do our low carbon transition. And here on this level, I highlighted 3 different points. I will highlight the trap of cheap electricity and oil price. And I also highlight the legacy of developmental states and Taiwan's use of green industrial policies. And finally, I will provide a case study, a kind of interesting case study, how the high carbon incumbents in this developmental state can push back the transition. So the bullet point tells you where we are at, where we want to go through the industrial policy, and the challenges we're going to face. And for the figures down below, these are the very typical Taiwanese government's industrial planning. There was a 5+2 innovative industry plan, and part of it is promotion green energy. This is the current plan started from 2016 and 17. Okay, so the first point on the trap, electricity and oil price, and Taiwan has relied on a development model that rely on cheap energy, cheap oil, cheap water, and so that the company gains certain advantage by not paying external environmental cost, local pollution, etc. So this is a table I draw from Taipower yesterday. It compares the electricity price between Taiwan and other countries from last year. So for the yellow highlight, you see Taiwan, and Taiwan's on the left is residential electricity, on the right is industrial electricity. Both of them are one among the lowest in the world, right? Canada seems to also have quite a low oil electricity price, but Taiwan is still much lower than that, right? So for compared to, for example, Singapore, Taiwan's price is about only half, right? So Taiwanese company has been enjoying this cheap electricity price, and therefore does not have a strong incentive to do energy conservation and upgrade their production to save energy. And Very similarly, you can see Taiwan has one of the lowest oil price. This is a comparison for CPC Corporation, Zhongyou. So which provides much of the Taiwan's gasoline. So compare Zhongyou, that is in Taiwan, compare that with Korea, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong. Taiwan has, again, the lowest oil price among these Asian neighbors. And this is in the background that Taiwan does not produce any oil. Taiwan imports 98% of our energy source, right? And the low price comes from heavy subsidies from the government. And this cheap oil and electricity price become a very difficult political subject because of the companies and to a lesser extent consumers enjoy the low price for so long. It is actually very difficult to increase the price because there are always complaints that this will put Taiwan in a disadvantage. Of course, although to me that argument does not make any sense, but that has been the politics. And especially in the past 20 years, Taiwan's economy has not doing especially well. And so any increase in these household prices is a political suicide. But there might be a window of opportunity coming since Taiwan's economy is doing relatively well this year, last year, and in the coming couple of years. So there might be I'm hoping there will be a window for change. But overall, Taiwan's cheap utility price is a legacy of the developmental states. It's based on what we call a brown economy model that based on high pollution, high emission, and low cost production. So the development legacy also shows that Taiwan's green new industrial policies. So I draw from this one of the paper by Dr. Kim in Australia, and his paper compares how Korea and Taiwan use national policies to create competitive advantage through green industrial policies. So I just want to highlight these are the few things Taiwanese government often do, right? So create domestic testbed for green technology exports, preemptive potential facilitate trading renewables, and secure initial markets, etc. So in short, the government is always heavily involved in creating, to managing different industries. And in this case, because the world is turning to renewables, so the renewable becomes the new sites that the developmental stage, try to merge its developmentalism with environmental goals. And with these initiatives, you see, for example, this brand new green industrial parks in Tainan. This is very much used for developing new solar technologies. And this is by the Tainan high-speed rail station. And government had poured substantial resources in developing these sectors. And similar policy holds true for the rapid development of offshore wind power. The Taiwan Strait is one of the best wind sites around the world. So Taiwan have been seeing a very fast, rapid development of offshore wind and going hand in hand with many multinational companies like the Worsted from Denmark. Right, so Taiwanese government used various different policy initiatives, for example, feed-in tariffs, so make sure the wind power will be purchased as a preferred rate, and also domestic content requirement to make sure as we're developing the offshore wind power, we are also cultivating domestic industries that can be the leaders in the wind power industries in the future, right? So the wind development have a very kind of industrial policy component to it. It's both an industrial policy and the renewable energy policy. Right. So in the last point, I want to highlight the transition has not been smooth. Very often there are pushbacks. And so on this photo, this is actually what we call 机车瀑布, scooter waterfalls in Taipei. It's become a kind of a meme and a scene that people will kind of come to this site to take photos, because it's, as you see, is scooter is one of the major transportation mode in Taiwan. With 23 million people, we have more than 14 million scooters in Taiwan. And most of these scooters are gasoline, so it creates air pollution, carbon emission at the same time. Right, so in 2000, so for the story on this, and in 2017, the government announced that by 2035, we can no longer sell gasoline-powered scooters. We call this fossil fuel vehicle phase-out policy, 禁售燃油机车, 禁售燃油车. And the policy promote e-scooters such as this. This is a company that promote the niche innovation. This company is called Gogoro. It's produced this really coolly, very nicely designed e-scooter that you can change battery very easily within 1 minute. And so this company was very successful that they are on track to be listed on NASDAQ sometime in the first quarter of this year. And so the government has been promoting this model, the e-scooters, and that's hoping that one day all scooters will be replaced. Like as you see in this slide, these are all happy e-scooter riders in the same location. But the transition was not smooth. The fossil fuel vehicle phase-out policy was reversed in 2019. Only after 2 years, the high carbon incumbent that sells gasoline scooter won the battle under the name of 油电平权. This basically says equal rights for oil and electricity. So the company actually, in my opinion, appropriated the justice discourse, saying that the government's promotion on e-scooter is unfair. Therefore, they should the gasoline is just as equally good. And because of their successful campaign, the pushbacks, and also building coalition with the maintenance shops in Taiwan that make a living based on these gasoline scooters, the policy was reversed, and there was no plan that we will propose the ban again anytime soon. Right. So this, to me, this is again a legacy, to a certain extent, a legacy of the developmental states, that some key incumbents, in this case, high polluting, high carbon incumbents, have a huge say in policy making, and also illustrate that transition is very often not as smooth. Okay, so I'm talking quite long. I'm already at the 55 points mark. So I'm going through the last part. I'm hoping maybe a bit more quickly. So on the more local dimension, how Taiwan's civil society facilitate bottom-up responses, I want to highlight that there is a lot of talk about energy democracy. So whenever we talked about these local initiatives, there is a lot of public consultation, public deliberation initiatives, try to make sure the energy transition process is as democratic, is as just as possible. Right, so here I am quickly go through a few points about public knowledge and democratic innovations. For example, I just want to quickly go through some survey results. most Taiwanese people are aware of climate change. They understand Taiwan has been impacted, and there are most of them support government's green initiatives. Although there are some on the right, although you can see there is some partisan difference, and mostly due to that the KMT, the pan-blue camp, has a higher supporter on nuclear power, while the DPP has been traditionally opposing to nuclear power. But other than that, renewable energy, green transition has been enjoying quite broad support. But on the same time, Taiwan, there's also very shallow public knowledge when asking what the majority of, what is a major source of energy in Taiwan. Most people actually answer nuclear power. 43% says nuclear power is a major source in Taiwan, although nuclear power, as for now, only accounts for less than 10%. So broad support, but quite shallow knowledge. So with that background, I'm going to, Taiwan has been doing quite a few, this bottom-up local climate initiatives, very often with the assistance from the government, right? So I'm highlighting some local initiatives. For example, there is this participatory budgeting on low carbon initiatives in New Taipei City. And in the middle, there is this community center, community college. They're calling for public participation to think about how citizens can save energy together. And on the right, the Taipei City also hosts this citizen town hall meetings on carbon reduction. And so in the process of revision, the current climate law, there is also a discussion of Taiwan government plan to host a citizen climate assembly in later part of this year. So overall, Taiwan has been trying to bring everyone on board to participate in the energy transition process, either through providing their ideas or sometimes providing their capital, right? So this is a company started by a student in my department, a sociologist turned into an entrepreneur, and she's running a company on community energy, so that every one of us, if you have extra money, you can invest in someone else's roof to build solar powers. Right, so this company has been quite successful, and this also brings on board the people who have land, who have roofs for solar installation, and on the other hand, people who have money who want to promote renewable. Okay, so there is also, these are the public citizen consultation webpage. So anyone can go online and submit their opinions on the ongoing revision of the climate law in Taiwan. So this is actually open. So if you have voice, so among the audience, if you have something to say, you can also submit right here. And so besides this democratic innovation, democratic participation initiatives, we have also seen certain degrees of activism on climate change. And this is mostly coming from the younger generation in Taiwan. The traditional environmental community has been catching up on the topic of climate change, but the youth has been leading the way. So for example, these are the Taiwan Youth Climate Coalition. They have been very active, and they organized one of the earliest climate march in Taiwan. And this is some photo from 2 years ago. It was very bad weather. I took the photo, so I was also in the march. Although the weather is bad, they were still attract maybe close to 1,000 people in downtown Taipei. So the youth are mobilized, but they are very often through a non-confrontational tactic. They are more involved in policy making, but there is a broad and wide interest among the younger generation in Taiwan. So from the local perspective, I want to end the talk with some the challenges, right? So in recent years, we have seen one of the, to me, the most challenging part is although renewable energy enjoy wide support, people know solar and wind are good, but how to do that properly has been a difficult task, right? And as Taiwan is very densely populated and very constrained on land, so finding the best location to promote solar is very tricky, right? So the government has been, this mainly happened in southern Taiwan because it's enjoy higher, there are more sun down south. And there has been conflict in the case of, we call this agrivoltaics, 农电共生, and aquavoltaics, right? How 渔电共生 that combine solar with fishery, aquaculture and farming productions. And there are many controversies. There are also controversy that solar installation are encroaching indigenous traditional territories or ecological sensitive zones. And with that, so the local NGOs and government are now promoting some type of social environmental kind of check mechanism, try to solve the land use conflict. This is very much ongoing, but this will be the key for Taiwan's to go even further to pursue a net zero future. So I will show you some photos of such conflicts. For example, this photo says that solar panels encroach farmland. It's kind of damaging the landscape, and it also increases the land price and hurts local farmers, which is a very serious situation in the farming communities. The same also happened in the fishery communities. You see the oyster clam farmers protest with their products and saying that their land were taken by solar development and their traditional livelihood are threatened. And in some cases, solar panel goes into indigenous community. This was one of the high-profile protests in Taidong, and this is traditionally indigenous territory, and a wetland was going to be built as a solar park. And local community were divided, there were protests, and become a very divisive topic locally, and the project was ended after the protest. So that is, I try to be as comprehensive as possible. I talked about different levels in Taiwan's climate politics. I hope I provide a very comprehensive and broad overview on the trend and also on the challenges Taiwan is facing. So this is my last slide. I'm using too much time. And I want to conclude by saying that, yes, Taiwan wants to help on this, and Taiwan very often use the slogan that Taiwan can help. But to do that, Taiwan really needs to move fast. But as for now, Taiwan is lagging behind in many different aspects. I also want to highlight, I don't have time to go through this in details. I really like the Global Taiwan as the speaker series. And I think so far I mostly talked about the domestic issues, but Taiwan's case also have global implications. For example, Taiwan's case contribute to the discussion on environmental authoritarianism, whether that's a good model, better model or not. Taiwan's isolated grid and higher density island geography all have implications to countries with similar situations. Taiwan also had global influence, either through capital, through religious values, and new technology exports. Taiwan can also play certain roles. And finally, Taiwan's as a tech hub, the supply chains and the new industrial sectors will also play a significant role in the global pursuit to deal with climate change. Well, that is everything. Thank you much for listening. We still have some time for questions and answers, and I look forward to the discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for this very thoughtful, informative talk. Sometimes I wonder if we can do such a multi-layered and thoughtful, in-depth analysis of the climate change situation in every single country. I think our whole planet will be a better place. I think we have about 23 minutes for discussion. So I already see a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm gonna read them to John, and John, you can also read them yourself in the Q&A box. So I think our first two questions coming from Dr. Chow, who's also an expert on the environment, also from Taiwan. Dr. Chow asked, the first question is, Taiwan is now part of the UN climate change management framework. So there's no voice or official recognition of Taiwan's effort and contribution to the carbon emission reduction worldwide. How will this access and how will this access and representativeness issue be resolved and dealt with in a fair and constructive way?
Well, thank you so much for the questions. And to me, as someone who studied climate, I'm really hoping that Taiwan can be included in the international regime in a meaningful capacity. And for one, I think the UN Convention actually does not require a statehood to join as an observer. For example, the Palestine and the Holy See was part of the regime, and it was part of the UN framework. Both of them are not it's a different state, right? So Taiwan, I think, to me, should be included, and I think there are certain momentums from our international allies, including mostly support from Japan, from the United States, and I'm hoping there will be certain progress on this in the coming years. But how likely that will happen, it's really a larger question on international politics. It's obviously more than climate change. It's about how much international space Taiwan can have, and this is quite similar to the situation with WHO, right? So Taiwan is, although with quite strong COVID kind of prevention actions, Taiwan was excluded from the entire process. And to me, as a Taiwanese scholar studying climate change, it's really my sincere hope that we can be part of this, and it's for Taiwan's own interest that we can have better experiences, better expertise, knowledge, and information, but also we are also very willing to share what Taiwan can offer to the world. Yeah.
Yes, great. So Dr. Chow has a second question. To meet the carbon neutrality goal by 2050, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges lying ahead for Taiwan?
Okay, so the challenges, I think, comes from the last part of my slides, right? So I think to meet the challenge, Taiwan needs to ramp up the renewable energy production very, very rapidly, and to the scale that people, I think, for now cannot grapple with. I think one of my colleagues calculated that to reach that goal, about maybe 5% of Taiwan's land has to be solar panels. And that is quite substantial. And Taiwan is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. So there will be a lot of land use conflicts, not only in the rural area, but also just people just where to put the solar panels. And then people have to recognize that it's part of the infrastructure and it will be everywhere. And I think for now, we still don't have that awareness. And that, to me, that is, since we have so little land, and it will only become harder and harder because obviously we started with the places that are the easiest. But now when we are moving into some more tricky, difficult land use situation, the conflict will only intensify. And that's something that all of us has to come together and figure a way out. And to me, that is the biggest challenge, the land use, and to meet the renewable energy target. And both solar and wind, even the offshore wind, has its land use conflicts. Okay.
Thank you. Our next two questions are from Professor Zhu Yunqu from McMaster University. Professor Xu is actually our next speaker for the Global Taiwan Studies series in early March. So Professor Xu asked, first question, in terms of the entanglement of Taiwan's environmental policies and its international politics, how have different stakeholders, for example, NGOs, private sector, central and local governments, responded to the situation? And is there any appeal to delinking the two agenda? If yes, what are the politics involved? If not, why not? And I'll throw the second question together, so John, you can decide how to answer them. So the second question is, how has or has not neoliberalism impacted the energy policies in Taiwan, especially given its enduring developmentalist legacy? So you can clearly see this is a question coming from a political scientist.
Yes, thank you so much for Dr. Xu for the question. So for the first question, your entanglement of Taiwan's environmental policy, international politics, can this any appeal to delink the two agenda? Let me think about this briefly. I think this is a very insightful question. I think the linkage with international politics mostly happens at the national level, right? So for delinking, if you talk about some local government, municipal governments, they are not very often not thinking about struggling for international space. They mostly try to promote saving energy and at the local level. So the linkage is mostly coming from the central government, and the central government has been using. I didn't cover this in my talk, but there are various different strategies. For example, climate also feature in some of the Taiwan's kind of foreign aid strategy, try to help most of our diplomatic allies are very vulnerable to climate change, these island states or developing countries, and try to combine Taiwan's expertise in, for example, disaster management and with international aid. Right. So I think that the linkage mostly at the central level, and they are trying to find different ways to. I think I don't see a delinking happening, but I think they are promoting different strategy. I think one scholar called this polycentric strategy, try to reach out from the local government through industries and very often through NGOs, right? So Taiwanese NGOs are also doing quite a bit globally, try to expand our spaces. But for the local governments, the linkage was not that obvious. It's mostly more local governance issues. Okay, so the second question, excellent. I can see that coming from Dr. Xu. And for neoliberalism impacting energy policies in Taiwan, yes, we see some neoliberalism coming in, but I would say overall, the energy sector was still very heavily regulated. I think there are some marketization initiatives, but in short, I don't see that impact that much. I think it's still very heavily involving state, and the new development states, still find ways to maintain the model. And even though we are in this neoliberal background, the context is a background. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Our next two questions, one coming from Amy Yang, one coming from Sarah Whelan, and both are kind of, also related to politics. So Amy's question is like, do you think a change in the ruling power of Taiwan would negatively impact the progress that has been made when it comes to climate change and renewable energy? And Sarah's question is, despite the lack of recognition by the global community, do you think Taiwan has enough political momentum to continue toward the net zero goal by 2050? So these are both, kind of projecting what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, so let me answer Sarah's question first. For a long time, that has been the case. I think for a long time, especially before maybe 5 years ago, before 2016, I think there's little momentum in Taiwan, mainly because no one really cares about how Taiwan is doing. That's one of the major reasons. Because Taiwan can propose all these nice words, but voluntarily, and no one will hold Taiwan accountable. But as for now, I think the game is entirely changed due to, ironically, corporate climate actions. Now the supply chain, the pressure is very real. The Apple wants their product to be carbon neutral, right? So the manufacturing has to follow through. The EU is proposing a carbon tariff, so the industry are panicked, so that they ask the government, we should propose our own carbon price so that we don't have to pay that tariff. We want to pay our tax at home and not to foreign actors, right? So in a way, I'm seeing it's through this corporate initiatives that so the company are actually, in a way, leading the change and then pushing the government to take more rapid actions. So to answer your question, I think the reciprocity and accountability, I think in the near future will still coming from mainly the corporate governance side. And to me, that's really interesting to observe, because as sociologists, I have a lot of skepticism how much this corporate governance can really achieve. But as for now, I think they're making some positive impacts on climate governance. And going back to Amy's question, I think Amy's question is whether ruling power, you mean if there's a change of government in the next election, would this impact the progress? It's a hypothetical question. It's quite difficult to answer. But if coming back to my answer to Sarah's question, I think if the pressure mainly come from supply chain, I'm pretty optimistic that the momentum will keep going. And just that one of the key difference between KMT and DPP is their view on nuclear power, right? And which is being very controversial. And I think that actually led to the next question on Nicholas' question on asking energy, on nuclear energy. I will answer that also right here.
Yes, on that nuclear question, energy question, Nicholas' question. First, I want to read it just for the audience. Do you think that the political opposition between the DPP and the KMT is not helping in open debate that would favor the ecological debate regarding the nuclear energy? I actually have a follow-up question on that, because I was also struck by what you mentioned earlier about the two referendums. And because, I mean, both, if you look at the content of the referendums, they're really about the environment, about climate change, these things, but they're highly politicized, right? They'll almost become kind of a political battle between two parties. It has nothing to do with the environment itself. I think that's actually really pretty much echoes what Nicholas is asking here. So as an environmental sociologist, how do you see this kind of high politicization of these environmental conversations, I think, in Taiwan?
Yeah, I think let me answer the question from a few different angles. I think first, in this past referendum, we learned that direct democracy referendum, as the way it's done in Taiwan, is not the best way for any public discussion. And the question was very technical, but once the electoral season is in place, it becomes highly politicized, and people just in the end voting along the party lines. There is no although me and my friend discussed, but the general public, I think there is little discussion going on, and people just voting based on their party identification. So, but for nuclear energy, I I know it's a controversy even within the environmental circle. I have climate policy friends who are very in favor of nuclear power because it does not emit carbon. And just I am in a opposition position for the record. I think Taiwan nuclear energy will not be a good solution for the following three reasons. First, Taiwan has lots of earthquakes, right? So nuclear power needs to have a stable geography to operate, and Taiwan is the nuclear forward is built on a fault line and not the best location to build nuclear power plants, right? And just as an island with full of earthquakes. The second is nuclear waste. Taiwan has been putting the nuclear waste in Lanyu, the Orchid Islands. It's an outlying island of Taiwan, and it's a homeland to Dawu people, and obviously without much of their consent. So well, that was done during authoritarian era, and to me, without resolving that environmental injustice, I think it's unfair to keep pursuing nuclear power because we're just dumping the waste to indigenous traditional land. And finally, to me, also very persuasive, just as an economic case. I think if you look at the long-term trend on power generation, nuclear power is the one that actually quite stagnant. The economic does not work for nuclear power. It becomes more and more expensive because people see that we have to do extra safety controls with that technology. But for renewables, you have seen dramatic decrease of cost. And so to me, if you think about planning for the future, I think it's quite obvious renewable. Wind and solar, although they have their problems, but they should be the main source, not the nuclear. And I think that answers Nicholas' question.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. Thank you. And our next question from Chung Sen is really about alternative energy sources. In other words, I mean, if you don't want nuclear energy, there are like all the kind of other concerns about oil, all these things. So what are some other possibilities for alternative energy?
Yeah, so that's actually pretty hard. I mean, the energy has to come from somewhere, right? So to me, solar and wind will still play the key role, and to an energy source that is not harnessed enough is geothermal. I think due to some legal, quite complex legal situation, it's very hard to develop geothermal energy in Taiwan. While on the other hand, if you look at Philippines, the Philippines was one of the leaders in geothermal energy. And Taiwan does have that geography to increase the production on geothermal. But even with large geothermal to fulfill the need for the entire country is still quite difficult. To me, I think for a sociological perspective, we need to think more about the demand side, right? So as for now, we are mostly thinking about supply side. How do we generate energy from different sources? But for the demand side, how do we upgrade our economy? And there will be winners and losers, obviously. And how do we think about reinvent our economy with a more low carbon trajectory, and also pay attention to the people who got hurt in the process. It's important. And on the demand side, you can start to think about the electricity prices, oil prices, etc. And how do we make the price reflect the external costs, etc. Right. So for Chung San's question, it will be difficult. Yes, all of these are harnessed, but they are likely to reach the scale we need. So Taiwan's strategy is best to wind and solar, keep pushing and developing new technologies, but also at the same time thinking about some limits, thinking about the demand side. How do we use less energy, and how do we steer our economy to more low carbon industries?
Thank you. Our last question coming from Michael, I think it's actually related to what you just said about the people who got hurt and the cost. in this whole transition. Michael asked, lots of young men with no other skills training depend on repair of motorbikes, right? So is there any plan to train them for new work as part of the plan to eliminate motorbikes?
Good question. Thanks, Michael, for following up that story. That is one of my ongoing research projects. And for that, I think when government pushed out for the phase-out policy, they really didn't think hard enough on that constituent. They did not aware that the repair shop can be such a key stakeholder, because most of them are family-owned and small scale, and people did not pay enough attention to them on how they will be impacted. So as for now, although there will be no phase-out policy goals, the government are already in place pouring resources into this sector to make sure in the future with fewer motorbikes, they will find other jobs, or they can join the e-scooter economy in various different ways, right? So, and that's part of the just transition, thinking about how do we transition without leaving anyone behind, right? So, and that has been government learned a hard lesson with that pushback, and so yes, it's ongoing.
Thank you, John. I think that concludes all our questions. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you again for this wonderful talk. And it's actually very informative. I think a lot of the themes that you talk about in the context of Taiwan can also be very helpful for thinking about climate change issues in other contexts. So, I just, thank you so much. And hope next time we can have the opportunity to welcome you in person here in Toronto. And so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day in Taipei. And for all the audience members, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are in Canada, have a good night, and hope to see you again in our next event of the Global Taiwan Studies lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suda.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.